Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Expanded Knowledge Podcast. Tonight, we have with us Jim Garrison. And Jim, I'm going to ask you to please introduce yourself and tell us your background and your involvement with the UFO UAP issue.
Well, thank you, Anthony, for this opportunity. Hello, everybody. I'm Jim Garrison. I'm the director of the Washington office of the New Paradigm Institute, which has been set up in Washington, D.C. to support the U.S. government generally, but I think very specifically the U.S. Congress in its efforts to disclose to the American public and the world public the information pertaining to unidentified anomalous phenomena. I have a rather long and varied background. I've been involved in the UFO domain since the late 1970s when a colleague of mine, Danny Sheehan, and I here in Washington, D.C. actually went to the National Archives and saw the newly declassified microfilm pertaining to Project Blue Book and the information that they had about various unidentified flying objects, as they were called then, and then just followed the field over the years. It always was just common sense to me that we are not alone in the universe. I mean, I couldn't conceive of a universe as vast as ours that didn't have other life. It didn't make any sense. So when Danny Sheehan called me up last August as I was transitioning out of the executive leadership of Ubiquity University, and said, "Hey, we're starting an office in Washington. Would love to have you come in and get involved." I said, "Sure, why not?" And within 30 days, I was in Washington, D.C., and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah. So, how did you meet Danny exactly?
Oh, Danny and I go back a very long way.
Right.
We met actually in the fall of 1973 when I was back at Harvard University at the Divinity School, and turned out Danny, who had done Harvard College and then Harvard Law School, was also attending the Divinity School, and we met, and we've been fast friends ever since. We've had many adventures along the way with the Karen Silkwood case and work that we did with establishing the Christic Institute and working on various matters with Christic, and then with Mr. Gorbachev through the State of the World Forum, and now with the New Paradigm Institute. I've known Danny and his wife, Sarah Nelson, for an exceedingly long time.
Wow.
And I count them as dear friends and colleagues in the struggle for social justice and a more abundant and equitable world.
Great. I see. So you went to college together, to undergrad at Harvard, or to
No. When I was doing my graduate work at
graduate? Okay. At Harvard. And so are you a lawyer as well, or what is your
No.
special, what is your, yeah.
No, I majored in history.
Oh, nice.
Did my PhD after Harvard at Cambridge University in philosophical theology,
Oh,
and essentially have been an activist. Got involved with the Soviet Union during the time of Mikhail Gorbachev,
okay.
and spent many years working directly with Mr. Gorbachev, convening world leaders in all kinds of places around the world. It was a great adventure of the spirit and very good politics.
Okay.
Then I was asked to become the president of a university in California, which I did, and I ran that for 20 years, and then transitioned to what I'm now doing at the New Paradigm Institute in Washington, D.C. on what is really the great issue of our day, for the human race to take in that we are not alone.
Yes, yes, and I wanna get into the UAP UFO issue, um, but I want to ask you a little bit more about your background because it's very interesting to me. And for the listeners who may not be as brushed up on history per se, Mikhail Gorbachev was there was a very like openness from him to cooperate with the West and to kind of reform some of the issues of the Soviet Union.
It's probably worth going into in some detail because uh, if you want to understand what's going on right now in Ukraine, it's very important to understand what happened between Soviet Russia and the United States 30 years ago.
Okay.
And I was there, I was deeply involved.
So Jim, can I then jump in right there and say I'm fascinated by that, and if your time permits in the near future, maybe we could like really
Sure,
focus on the Ukraine war and because
would love to.
and your perspective, which would be very
Yeah, yeah,
valuable, I think.
yeah,
But
yeah.
but like I'm gonna try to steer us into the UFO UAP
Sure,
topic here a little bit.
sure.
So not to cut you off rudely at
No,
all,
no, no,
but
no,
yeah.
no. Let's do
But
it.
that's really interesting. So you're working, you start working with Gorbachev, like you said, um, and this is in the 80s. You said,
Yeah, he came to power in March of 1985, and then the Soviet Union dissolved in December of 1991. So during those years, he was the president of the Soviet
right?
Union.
And the Berlin Wall came down in '88, right?
89, November 1989.
Okay, yeah. And so before we move off of that, I'm just curious, what was like your goal, the objective of the work you were doing there, just for some context.
With Gorbachev?
Yes, yes.
Well, let's see. I did my PhD dissertation on the question of why it is that after several billion years of evolutionary life on planet Earth, our species in our generation has brought the entire life process to the brink of extinction through thermonuclear war.
Huh.
This seemed to me as a young man to be the most important question that I could ponder. In the course of writing the dissertation and talking with people, I discovered that whenever you would talk about nuclear weapons and the possibility of mass annihilation, they all justified the use of nuclear weapons because they said it's because of the Russians. And the Russians are so evil and communism is so evil that we have to be willing to destroy all planetary life. That's how bad they are.
Uh-huh.
And I found that extraordinary. I found it absurd, actually.
Mm.
But then in 1982, I decided to actually go to the Soviet Union and find out for myself who these people are and why they were so evil and why we needed to have weapons of mass destruction to destroy the whole planet because of the Russians.
Yeah.
So I traveled there and met. I was there for 2.5 months and realized a couple of things. Number one, that there was no way that the Soviet Union was going to attack NATO and the United States. They had a decrepit economy. There was no possibility. And I then, secondly, realized that we didn't need the nuclear weapons because the Russians were so bad. We needed the Russians to be bad to justify the nuclear weapons. That the Russian threat was a function of the propaganda needed to justify in the American public mind massive amounts of money going to nuclear weapons. And once you realize that the notion of whoever it is that you think is evil, I come out of the Vietnam War. I came of age during the Vietnam War. I refused the draft. But the American media portrayed Ho Chi Minh, who was the leader of the North Vietnamese at the time, as a Hitler-like figure, completely evil, bent on taking over South Vietnam and taking over Indochina and eventually the United States.
Yeah.
It's the same playbook that the U.S. war machine trots out, whether it's against Saddam Hussein in Iraq, whether it's against the Taliban in Afghanistan, whether it's against Gaddafi in Libya before they overthrew that regime, whether it's Assad in Syria, whether it's Putin. I mean, those of you listening to this program, just quickly, what do you think about Vladimir Putin? He's evil.
Right.
He invaded Ukraine. He's a Hitler-like figure. He's a tyrant. He's corrupt. These are all pieces of information that have actually no relevance to reality. But it's what most people believe because that's what the mass media tells us is true. And once the mass media convinces the public that there's an enemy out there, then that justifies the expenditures for the war machine. And just to take a quick example of Iraq, I don't know whether your viewers remember what happened in Iraq, but the Bush Jr. Administration, starting in 2000, began after 9/11, realized that that was the perfect pretext to invade Iraq.
Yeah.
After invading Afghanistan. So they started this story that Iraq and Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons and chemical weapons. They fed that through the media until 70% of the US public believed that was true and supported the war in Iraq. Turns out there were no weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein wasn't a particularly bad guy. He just happened to be the head of Iraq, and they wanted to go destroy Iraq and take over the oil fields, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's what we're doing in Ukraine. Most of the American public believe that the Russians invaded Ukraine in an unprovoked invasion, and the United States has to support Ukraine to withstand the encroachments of Putin and an expanding Russia. That's completely untrue. Just like the notion of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and the notion that the Vietnamese were trying to take over Indochina back in the 60s, it's all a fabrication to justify the US war machine. And that's the insight I got out of my dissertation. Once I realized that we didn't need the nuclear weapons because of the Russians, we actually needed the Russians to be a threat to justify our nuclear weapons. All of a sudden, it was like going from seeing through a glass darkly to seeing face to face and becoming really clear about the manipulation of information. Now, this is important, Anthony, in understanding the UFO phenomenon. Why? Because starting immediately after the Second World War, when the United States developed the nuclear weapons technology and dropped the first, or ignited the first atomic device on July 16th, 1945, and then within weeks dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. All of a sudden, that's when the UFOs started to show up. And Roswell, which happened in July of 1947, is the classic case. UFO craft crash landed. 4 aliens were killed in the crash. The U.S. military came and recovered the remains, and initially actually announced that it was a flying saucer, and then very quickly recanted. And what then began to happen is that the U.S. government began to systematically lie to the American people about the reality of UFOs. And further, after the Robertson panel in 1953, the CIA said, not only do we have to lie to the American people, we have to take measures to make sure that the UFO issue disappears. And that's exactly what happened. And they conducted this propaganda campaign so effectively that by the 1960s, 70s, if you even talked about UFOs, you were considered crazy, right?
Right.
So what's happening right now is that information, which was kept secret for 80 years, while the U.S. government affirmatively lied to the public and made the information completely disappear. That's what happens on a regular basis. It's not something that just happens with UFOs.
Right.
This is what the U.S. government does, and many governments do, but particularly the U.S. government. It has no qualms about lying to the American people.
Right.
And it's been lying to the American people ever since I was a boy. And once you get that, it's like an illumination. So whatever you're getting through CNN or Fox News or MSNBC or any of the major networks, CBS, ABC, NBC, it's basically information that they want you to have because they're shaping your perspective on the world. They know that once they shape your perspective, your behavior will follow. It's one reason why U.S. television and U.S. media is so full of commercials. They want this constant barrage into your consciousness and psyche that the only way you're going to be happy, young man, young woman, is to buy this product. So they're always conditioning the public in a way that is not in accordance with the public good or the public interest, but serves the interests of the war machine, the military industrial complex, the big pharmaceutical companies. Look on TV. How many drugs every day are proffered to the American people as the solution to whatever it is that ails you?
Right.
And so the experience that I had is really important in understanding what's going on with disclosure, because we haven't been dealt a straight deck. And so what the public is doing, what the New Paradigm Institute is doing, along with other organizations, is trying to kind of pry the door open and let light in, so that the most important piece of information in the history of the world, that we are not alone, that extraterrestrial civilizations exist and have been on planet Earth and have been communicating with human beings, is revealed to the larger public. That's what New Paradigm Institute's about. And, you know, I urge everyone who's interested in getting involved to go to newparadigminstitute.org. There's all kinds of ways for you to get involved.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thanks for sharing all that. There's a lot that we could unpack from that, but really well said, and bringing us into the UAP topic. I really would like to have you back to do a deep dive on the Russia thing, because,
Sure.
and I'm constantly working with students that are, you know, 17, 18, 19 years old, and you know, it you can see the patterns, right? And you're right, like, and I have
Totally.
found that, even so, for example, you probably read this book at some point, Blank Check.
No, I don't know that. Who's it by?
Tim Weiner.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you would probably actually find this, but this really opened me up to what you were just talking about, like, because if you go back to the very beginning of the Cold War, and he documents it like meticulously and with all the sources and stuff in here. But what you're saying, I found to be true, that the Soviet like boogeyman was created to have a reason to build
Exactly.
up the nuclear arsenal. And it's almost, I always tell my students when we go through this, like, it's just clear as day when you look back at the primary
Exactly.
sources, and now what it's been going on for as long as the UFO issue's been going on, right? Like 80
That's
years.
exactly right.
And here
That's
we are with
exactly right. And
all
then
that.
they justify not telling the truth about UFOs because we have to keep it secret from the Russians.
Yeah, exactly.
I
Right.
mean, once you get it, the world gets very simple.
Yes, yes. So I want to come back to that later, because I want to get your opinion on something related to that, like the actual mechanism of keeping this secret. But I want to shift gears a little bit right now.
Sure.
Um, 1 week from today, we've got the hearing, first congressional hearing since in a year and a half, since the David Grusch, Fravor, and Graves came out. Monumental hearing, although most people never heard of it. What's you're down there in Washington, right? And you're on the front lines there, being an activist and a lobbyist on this topic. What can you tell us about the hearings?
Well, they're being convened by Representative Nancy Mace. She's going to be chairing the hearing.
Mm-hmm.
It's being conducted in the same room, actually, as the hearing last year, because it's the Government Oversight Committee of the House of Representatives. And it's a joint hearing of two subcommittees, one on cybersecurity and the other one on national security. As far
Can I
as we
briefly interject, not to throw you off track, but what's
sure,
the deal with the cyber? What does that have to do with this at all?
it's not clear, but
Huh.
what we do know is that there are two subcommittees that were interested in coming together to convene the hearings,
Okay.
and that's good. The
Okay.
more congressional committees and subcommittees that get involved, the better. And
Yeah. Okay.
we understand that Lou Elizondo is going to be testifying. He was the head of ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program at the Pentagon. He resigned. He became a whistleblower. He took information to the New York Times in December of 2017. And it was that New York Times article that really, in many people's estimation, really ignited the modern UAP disclosure movement. And so Lou, we understand, is going to be there. Tim Gallaudet, he's a rear admiral in the Navy. He was also the former director of the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. He has spoken out publicly on a number of occasions about the fact that in his experience in the Navy, the whole UAP domain was out there, and that there's evidence, and the world needs to pay attention to this.
Mm-hmm.
There may be another witness We don't know. They've been keeping it very closely under wraps. Mike Turner, the head of the House Intelligence Committee, about a month ago tried to shut the hearing down, and Representative May said, come hell or high water, the hearing is going to happen. We've been coordinating with her office and Tim Burchett's office to be as supportive as we possibly can. We also know that there's the possibility of another hearing on the 19th on the Senate side with Senator Gillibrand. So there's a lot happening in the U.S. right now. A lot happening, and in the Congress, and it's in the immediate aftermath of the election from yesterday.
Right. And I mean, it would make sense if they had firsthand witnesses to not reveal them, because Tim Burchett said last time that they had more and they were kind of scared off of coming. So it would make sense that to keep it mine. Why not just don't say anything until the hearing starts, you know? But I'm just curious, if you heard anything different. So I guess we'll find out and we'll see. And do you have, obviously the election just happened, do you have any insights about what disclosure might look like, and the role of the presidential administration in this process, as it'll now be with Trump?
Well, I think a lot remains to be seen. What we do know is Trump has referred to it on a number of occasions in his media interviews, and has indicated not only interest in the domain, but the willingness to disclose. Robert Kennedy Jr., who's been working with his campaign, knows a lot about UAP disclosure, has urged Trump to be forthcoming, to be this disclosure president. That's what we know so far. But Trump is a very mercurial man, as you know. The legacy forces are stronger than we can imagine. Right. So what is going to take place and how is anybody's guess.
Sure. Jim, can I ask you, because I'm curious if you might have any different insights from your standpoint, but what is preventing this from becoming a full-blown congressional investigation? You know, I look back to the mid-'70s and the Church Committee, the Pike Committee, and those issues with transparency in the intelligence community back then. It was like a watershed moment, and it seemed very logical what they did. You know, there was 2 different congressional and 1 executive investigative committees. They had hearings over the course of a year or more, and they had all these people come and get subpoenaed, testify. The information came out. Wow, we found out about MK Ultra. We found out about COINTELPRO and all this other stuff. And then they started overseeing the intelligence community more. This seems to me like, okay, you had David Grusch come forward. He went through all the official processes. He said what he said. He said he's ready to give you the exact names and locations. Where's the investigation? Why has there not already been assigned an investigation? Do you have any kind of insights on that? What's stopping that from happening? Is it that the Congress people really just don't care, or like, is there some other?
Well, for the same reason that we haven't had a single investigation of the CIA since the Church Committee.
So they just figured
50
out.
years since the Church Committee.
They kind of figured out
which was the only investigation of the CIA since the setting up of the CIA. And so if you think about it in those terms, we've had far more exposure of the UAP issue than we have about the Central Intelligence Agency. You know, the legacy forces that came together right there in 1947 around Roswell,
with the
and
National
the creation
Security
of the
Act,
National Security State, and the CIA, and the Pentagon and Atomic Energy Commission and so forth. That was the ignition of what became known as the military-industrial complex. And that military-industrial complex has created a state within a state. People want to know what the deep state is. It's not the Democrats eating babies like the Republicans have depicted. The deep state was born with the UFO phenomenon. When the US government, at the apogee moment of its power, at the end of the Second World War, all of a sudden discovered that it couldn't even control its own airspace because there was alien technology and non-human intelligences that were present even in top secret facilities like nuclear weapons facilities right there in New Mexico near the Alamogordo, where the nuclear test happened in July of 1945. And what President Truman did, which is basically framed U.S. history since then, is he created the national security state. Right. He said that this is so secret. It has to be kept so secret that even the Congress can't know. The government can't really know. So he appointed what they called the Majestic 12 of the military, of academic institutions, scientists, and those 12 men created a state within a state that began to siphon money out of the budgets, that began to develop special access programs, and it was an off-the-shelf government. And it was that against which President Eisenhower in 1961 warned the American people.
Yeah.
But it was too late. And John Kennedy came in and tried to take it on, and he was assassinated. And he was assassinated precisely by that group. And that group has controlled the United States ever since. And that's why under the Biden administration, we've been in escalating war in Europe against Russia, assisting Israel in its genocide and regionalization of war in the Middle East, escalating war against China. This is the war machine. And people just need to take in that the UFO phenomenon is part of the war machine. And that's why it's secret. The people love darkness because their deeds are evil. There's more classified information by the US government than declassified information. Everything is a secret. Why? Because of the corruption.
Yeah. Well, it's to keep us safe, right? It's national security.
I mean, if you look at 75 years of US power over the world, where have we ended up? We've ended up on the brink of self-destruction. I mean, Americans need to wake up, man.
Yes.
I raise these issues, Anthony, because there's a context for all the secrecy and duplicity and coerciveness surrounding the UFO issue. This isn't been happening on the side. This is happening as a central part of the military-industrial complex,
right?
Whose sole purpose in keeping it secret is to try to get this ET technology and build even more lethal weapons than nuclear weapons so that they can really get the bad guys. So it's a worldview. It's a mentality. I mean, we just had a whistleblower, Daniel Schellenberger, talk about, the Immaculate Constellation.
Right.
This top secret group inside the Pentagon that has a complete database of all the recovered craft, all the recovered bodies, all the reverse engineering. And according to Richard Dolan, the great historian, anybody wanting to be informed about it's got to read Richard Dolan's 2-volume UFOs in the National Security State. It's absolutely essential reading. And he points out that this immaculate constellation has been around, since the 40s by other names.
Right.
All the while, they're lying to the American public. And we at the New Paradigm Institute and you with your podcast are like David's against Goliath, trying laboriously to bring this information into the light of day, because it's the most important information in the history of the entire human species. The reality that we're not alone and that there are extraterrestrial civilizations far more advanced than we are that have been on planet Earth. And we have the opportunity now to communicate with them. And that's one reason, by the way, why the New Paradigm Institute, in partnership with Ubiquity University, is starting courses in January to teach people how to communicate with these extraterrestrials. We cannot allow the diplomacy, the contact with the extraterrestrials to be the purview of the US government. Look what they've done with this information over 80 years. We have to get this information out into the public domain. I foresee a day when millions, billions of people are communicating with the ETs on a regular basis. So the only way to ensure a positive contact with the extraterrestrials is to radically democratize it and bring everybody in on the information and the capacity to intelligibly communicate with extraterrestrial beings.
Right. At New Paradigm Institute and in your experience, have you been able to communicate with non-human intelligence?
Well, we have lots of people that have been communicating. We have a whole experiencer circles of people. There's been thousands, millions of people who've communicated with the ETs, not only in the United States, but around the world, and been doing it for the last 80 years. In fact, if you talk to the indigenous people, they've been communicating with what they call the star people forever.
Right.
It's only the United States and the West, captured by the restrictive scientific reductionist paradigm, that don't understand that this is a reality. The rest of the world outside of North America and East and Western Europe completely takes this for granted.
Right. And would you say it's accurate that there's a variety of intelligences or beings from different places? And it's when we talk about communication or, looking into the future, diplomacy or interaction, would you say, in your view, it's accurate that there are a variety of different groups with different agendas and different histories of their presence on Earth?
Yeah, I would say that seems to be the case.
And so understanding that it must be very complex, right? But given what you've seen from the as you said, the experiencer groups and people who have been able to communicate, what are the overlapping patterns, or like what is the big takeaway of like what's the outcome of the communication about like the state of this whole thing?
Well, there's many layers to what you just asked, but I think first of all, all indications are that there's a range of different, almost species of non-human intelligences that are out there. Some from different star systems, some from different dimensions, parallel universes, some from different time zone.
Maybe even hidden on this earth for a long time,
Yeah, what
perhaps.
they call crypto-terrestrials. And uh, some have different agendas, I'm sure. My sense is that if they had malevolent intentions, they could have taken over a long, long time ago. And the fact that they haven't is an indication of their basic goodwill. I believe that if you look at all the experiences of people all over the world over the last 80 years, the overwhelming communication from the ETs to humans is that you're endangering yourselves through thermonuclear war and weapons.
Mm.
And you're endangering the ecosystem because of the way you're doing violence against the environment. And you need to stop. So, in my view, and I think in our view at the New Paradigm Institute,
Mhm.
the ETs are here for ultimately a benign reason. Now, does that mean that there's no malevolence among them? No.
Right.
Light and dark dimensions pervade the entire cosmos. But I think the fact that we're still here, living in sovereignty, means that whatever they're doing with abductions or hybridization programs or any of the other things that are out there, um, they're leaving us essentially alone and warning us and wanting us to radically transform the way we treat each other and the way we treat the larger planetary ecosystem.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm obviously like still really open-minded to what might be the underlying truth. I mean, if we could ever even really get that, I guess without just direct experience somehow. Um, but yeah, I would agree with you that there's a net there must be a net positive. I guess just to entertain like a counterpoint to that, right? Is that, it's possible, as you described, the what people call the deep state, the military industrial complex. You know, I think it's possible that, is there a non-human intelligence group that has interacted or infiltrated in a malevolent way with those powers who are controlling humanity in a sense? Or is that just 100% humanity's own doing? For me, it's a question that I can't have a firm answer for myself. You know what I mean? So I wonder what the what the heck's really going on. But that's why I'm hoping we can find out. Um, but like you said, it's very layered, because maybe if you really want to find out, you can't rely on the government. Like I've heard people say that, and that kind of makes sense. Maybe we need to just try to find answers ourselves while still trying to push transparency in the government. Um, and I mean, that sounds like what you're doing with New Paradigm. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
so that's fascinating. But yeah, I would agree with you, that obviously it can't be anything like wanting to destroy the planet or take away our sovereignty, as you said. But I wonder if there's any manipulation that has us where we are today, which is almost like, who was it? I forget the name, but some philosopher from back in the day said, the best way to keep prisoners is for them to not know that they're in prison. That type of idea.
Well, I think there's no doubt if you look at the religions and the long history of ET human interactivity going back thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of years,
Mm.
there's a lot of evidence, may be too strong of a term, but in the primordial memory of humankind, there's a memory that we have been genetically engineered by extraterrestrial beings. when all is said and done, I think it's going to turn out that we are hybrids,
Okay.
right? So the
Yeah.
fact that they're here now, A, is no surprise. They've been
Uh-huh.
around for thousands of years,
Right.
and they uh, have no doubt guided human development in ways that have produced who we are today. So I think you're absolutely right. I think there's evidence that we've been tampered with.
Mm.
There's also evidence that at the present moment they're trying to encourage the maturation of the human species so that we can move to the next level and stop being so aggressive. I've mentioned the war machine
Yeah.
intentionally because right now the US government has figured out how to trap the uh, UFOs, the alien craft, and shoot them out of the sky.
Right.
I mean, this is a measure, Anthony, of how insane the situation is, that instead of curiosity, instead of open heartedness or open handedness, let's find out who these people are and actually find out something. We're shooting them out of the sky. We're killing people. We're killing alien beings. We're trapping them. That's
Right.
how distorted human perceptions are. That's why I brought in this caricature of Vladimir Putin, or the caricature of Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi or Ho Chi Minh.
Uh-huh.
We're treating the ETs no differently than we treat ourselves. We're treating the environment no differently than we treat ourselves. There's a powerful disconnect in the human psyche. I mean, the fact that Israel is committing genocide now,
Mm.
engaging in mass murder
Mm-hmm.
of Palestinians
Right.
with the full support of the US government should
Yeah.
give us pause, because that mentality is what is keeping the national security state lid on the UFOs. It's not like this is an exception. This is just the way the US government does business.
Right. Yeah, and yeah, I mean it's fascinating. And I had a string of thoughts there while we were going on that thread. I kind of want to throw it out there while I have it in my mind, but and it was something I wanted to ask you about too, right? You talked about this idea of David against Goliath, and you're talking about just how deep does, you know, the knowledge of our origins, the history of this planet, right? What's been going on? How deep does it go? Like how much of a call it what you will, a matrix are we really living in, right? Um, and I think that we do need to know, and I agree with you when you say this is the most important topic that we could imagine, trying to get an answer on. And when you were saying that, right, I've thought about David Grusch, because in my opinion, right, and who knows, maybe history will prove me wrong and it's something else, but in my opinion, this seems like a person who came forward, um, kind of, I don't know if I want to say sacrifice himself, but I guess you could say that, put himself through this, which I'm sure is not fun at all, um, to try to get us forward with this. To me, you couldn't
Yeah.
ask for much better. I mean, I'm always telling people all the nitty gritty details, like, because he's not just some other military guy that came out and said there's spaceships and body and stuff, like, he went through, and I'm sure, like, and a good amount of our listeners probably know, he went through a whole huge process, 4-year investigation, had his evidence looked over for 16 months, deemed credible and urgent, all this stuff, right? And now this guy's coming out in front of Congress, in front of the world under oath, and saying these things. Plus, he's getting retaliation for doing it. If it was all made up, why would he be getting retaliation? like talking about spaceships and alien bodies, right? Like if that was all just crazy, talk, there wouldn't be this. There's so much writing on the wall that there's something very real and substantial about his claims. And then so I guess I wanted to ask you about him. Have you actually met with David Grusch and spoken with him?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm fascinated by him. And like, can you share with me anything like your impressions, what you spoke about, like just the feeling you got, and your, anything else about? Because I'm just, to me, this whole thing, he is still front and center of this whole thing, even though
Well,
he's faded back, and people with, I guess, today's attention span, people just move on and are like, yeah, a guy that said something, what's next? But like, it's crazy what he's done. It's huge, I think.
well, I think I see I certainly admire him,
Hmm.
and it's been a privilege to get to know him and interact with him. But I wouldn't put him on a particular pedestal. I see him as one of a series of individuals who have taken uh, courageous stands. Lou Elizondo's one,
Hmm.
and David Grusch is one. Uh, uh, Colonel Fravors one.
Yeah,
To
I
really,
just I just think, and maybe he was really the first one to even be able to get such evidence, but I just think what he's alleging just goes so much further than what any of these other people have ever been able to claim. Like he's literally saying the exact names and locations of these programs.
yeah, no, he was stellar.
Like, so that's what I
Stellar.
mean. Not to put him on a pedestal, but just to call it what it is from my view. Like
Yeah,
there's nothing else like it on the record, you
yeah,
know.
yeah. That's certainly true. It was a huge breakthrough. It's another milestone. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think Lou Elizondo was one.
Hmm.
Uh, the New York Times article
Because
was a
there would have
result
never
of that.
been the task force without that, which,
That's I was just going to say that if it hadn't have been for Lou Elizondo and the New York Times, there'd have been no David Grusch.
hmm, yeah, 'cause they just
There
wouldn't
would
have
have
had
been
that
no
program.
Arrow
Yeah.
office. There'd been no Senator Schumer and the UAP disclosure bill. So over time, things build up. And who knows? Maybe at the hearing on the 13th, there will be another David Grusch moment.
Hmm.
And then the next thing comes out. And that then opens the way and creates the foundation for the next disclosure.
Right. I mean, that's
Uh,
the best
uh,
we can hope for,
so
right?
that Bernard of Charvaux, in the 12th century, said that we are mere dwarfs standing on the shoulders of giants.
Huh?
And
Yeah.
David Grusch is one of those giants, no doubt about it.
Right. And as you're kind of illustrating, he's had to stand on many shoulders. That
Yeah,
goes many decades.
yeah,
So I
uh,
can really appreciate that.
yeah.
What do you have any insights on like what he's been up to? Because like after last year with the hearing, right? He was kind of vocal. He was kind of going on like news bits and speaking about the need for the
He's been
transparency
rather
and that.
quiet.
And
I don't know what he's doing now, but I think he just needed time to get over that experience and
okay.
collect his life back together again and spend time with his wife. And he went through a lot of duress, as did Lou Elizondo. These
Mm,
guys pay a heavy price,
yeah, I can't
and
even imagine.
I think he's had to heal, and I think we'll hear from him again, I'm sure.
Is there there was a lot of talk that he had an op-ed piece that would have that was going to have new information and kind of move, as they say, the needle forward. Any word on if his writing, if his op-ed piece is
I don't know the status of that. No.
okay? Very interesting. Um, yeah, so I guess we'll see what happens with this hearing. What do you think in terms of public reception, right? Because I have to say, people still just are not persuaded. And this is probably a complex psychological question because there's probably a percentage of people that even if the information is compelling and obvious, they just don't want to face that discomfort that something so monumental could be kept secret, let alone the fact that like we may not be alone and all of that, right? Um, so maybe they just dismiss it. But I find, like, for example, I told one of my college classes, maybe I took like 20 minutes to give them a breakdown of what I thought's the most compelling facts. And I would probably say maybe 80 to 90% of them really just didn't seem to really care too much. Um, and even a student that was like, um, I'm gonna look into it, I'm gonna look into it. Wow. And then I check in with them like a week later and I asked them, what did you think? Did you look into it? And they're like, oh, I just had so many more important things that came up. I'll see if I can get around to it. But like from my perspective, it's like, what could be more interesting? And so there's this clear gap, I think. And I guess my question is just, what do you see as being the way to get people to so-called up to speed on this and to take it seriously and to appreciate the implications of it?
Well, I think, after 80 years of being told that an issue doesn't exist, it takes time.
Mm,
If you're familiar with the scientific revolutions, I forget the name of the guy who wrote it. He was at UC Berkeley back in the 60s, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. He talks about the fact that for a paradigm to die, the people that hold the paradigm need to die also.
mm, mm,
That paradigms shift one funeral at a time. So we're in a world in which the people were brainwashed,
mm,
and that skepticism and that suspicion around the whole UFO phenomenon isn't going to just go away. So this is a task of a lifetime,
huh,
and the old regime needs to die off, and there's a new regime comes in, and we're part of the new. We're that early adopter phenomenon that always changes culture, and uh, uh, there's Hollywood is now engaged, the U.S. government is now engaged. There's more mainstream news about it. One of the breakthroughs of David Grusch, to go back to David Grusch, is that hearing got worldwide recognition, and he was brilliant in his presentation, and it had a huge effect. And now we have to just build on that over time. And at some point, there will be a critical mass, and all of a sudden, everybody is in on the deal.
mhm.
But it's not going to happen in a day. Evolution is not a straight line. Evolution meanders, and sometimes you take a step forward, sometimes sideways, sometimes backwards, and we're in the middle of that very rich mix. 10 years ago, there was nobody talking about it. Now you're talking about it. And even though these people may be preoccupied because they're young and they got other issues, they think about it.
Yeah.
They think about it. But listen, I need to jump. I got some time constraints here. So, but I'm happy to talk another time, Anthony, on any range of issues. and really appreciate everything that you're doing to get the message out, man. Well done.
Thanks a lot for coming and speaking with us today. I'm glad that we got to hear your perspective and talk about this.
Cool. Be well, my friend.
Thanks, Jim. You too.